Welcome back to part 3 of my n8n Masterclass series, where I take you from someone who's never stepped inside n8n to someone who's able to confidently build these solutions for yourself. If you missed parts 1 and 2, then I would highly recommend that you go and check those out first, as we're building upon what we've already learned in the previous lessons. However, if you are a little bit more advanced and you want to jump right in here, then feel free to do that. If you are brand new to the no-code AI space, definitely check out the previous episodes first, as this might not make sense what we're going to run through today if you haven't already set your foundations, which is really what part 1 and 2 is all about. Let's quickly recap on what we covered in parts 1 and 2. What you see on screen here is your AI agent architecture. So over on the left hand side, we have the user's input. That is our prompt, our request that we're sending to our AI agent. Here in the middle, you have the actual AI agent infrastructure. Now that can be broken down into two things, which is the brain or the large language model. So we were using ChatGPT 4.1 mini. And then you have the system prompt, right? And if you remember, the system prompt is the internal set of instructions which guides our AI agent in everything that it does. It tells it which tools to call and which order to call those tools. We can also give it guardrails. We can tell it how it must and must not behave, how it must talk, all these different things we can control in the system prompt. Then we have memory. Now, if you remember back to lesson 1, where I used the example of telling the AI agent when my birthday was, I then asked it when my birthday was and it couldn't tell me. So we sorted that out by adding simple memory. We then have tools, and we covered this in part 2. We connected up some different tools. We connected a calendar tool, a Gmail tool, and we also added a perplexity tool, but we didn't configure that. Then we have the output, right? Now for us, we were connecting to our AI agent through n8n's native chat. So it was using a chat trigger, and we were connecting back and forth using that chat. But in this lesson today, we're going to actually look at how we can get outside of n8n and still be able to talk to our AI agent, okay? So that's what we've covered so far. The first thing we're going to be looking at today are APIs. Now, API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it can really be boiled down in its simplest form to how two external softwares talk to one another, right? I've used this analogy here of a waiter at a restaurant. So when you go to a restaurant, you give your order to the waiter. The waiter takes that order to the kitchen prepares your order and sends it back to your table through the waiter. So the waiter is the API, right? You give your order to them, they take it away, give it to somebody else, and then they bring it back to you and you get what you asked for. So for AI, when you use an API to call a tool, you're sending a request and you're getting a response back, okay? And all of that is happening behind the scenes. So I've got this diagram here which illustrates it quite nicely. So this is what we looked at previously. We have our input, then we have our agent, then we have the output. So what's actually going on underneath this when we call on a tool? Well, let's use the OpenAI example, because we were using OpenAI to actually connect to OpenAI. We had an OpenAI chat model connected to our agent, and we were talking effectively to ChatGPT inside of n8n. So how does that work? Well, it works through an API call, right? So we send our message to our agent. Our agent sends that message off to OpenAI through an API. OpenAI generates its response and then sends that back to our AI agent, and that is all done through one API call, right? And then we get our output, which comes from n8n back to us, the user. So think of it like a phone call. You dial once, you have a conversation, and then you hang up, and that is one call, one API call, okay? And APIs are an integral part of building any form of agent or automation which is actually valuable. So this is a really important concept to understand, because n8n in isolation is actually pretty useless. But what makes n8n so powerful is the ability to connect it to external softwares, apps, services, and that's what kind of gives n8n its power, right? Let's take a look at what we built out so far. We've already talked about how we were connecting to OpenAI and receiving messages back and forth through an API call. So what was going on behind the scenes when we actually created that draft email? Well, it was the same thing, right? It was an API call. We send our request to Google, they complete that request, and then they send us a note back saying, yep, all good, job done. And it would be the same if we're doing anything with Drive as well. So that's an API call, it's being sent to the service, and then we're getting a response back. n8n has made it nice and easy for us to connect to a number of different third-party apps and services. So if you open up your node panel here on the right-hand side, and you type in tool, you're going to see a list of all of the available tools. And there are hundreds and hundreds of tools here, which is great because we can just drag and drop these into our canvas and we configure them and they're going to work. So that's perfect. But the real question is, what if you wanted to connect to an app or service which isn't in the native tool list in n8n? I'm sure if you think about the different things which you access in your life right now and you wanted to connect these to n8n, there are going to be multiple which aren't going to be native inside of n8n. There are millions and millions of different apps and softwares out there on the internet, and the chances of what you need being inside of n8n is probably quite slim in some cases. So how do we go about solving that problem? Well, the answer is with a HTTP request node. You see this here, HTTP request tool. So let's add one of those, and we're actually going to get rid of Perplexity for now, and we're going to connect up this HTTP request to our AI agent. So how is this HTTP request any different to this here? Well, it's not. It's not. This here, think of it like a fancy wrapper which has been put on top of one of these HTTP request nodes. And the way that works is Google has partnered with n8n and said, here is the form that you need to fill in anytime you want to contact us. Anytime you want to talk to Google, so whether that's create a draft in Gmail or whether it's upload a file in Google Drive, this is the form that you need to fill out. And it's pre-built, we can just go in, customize it, and it's great. So this here is the same process, but we need to configure it ourselves. So you can see here this URL field, okay? Now this URL field is going to be where we put in the URL for the external app or service that we want to connect to. And then we need authentication, so we're going to talk about that again in this lesson. So now you can see how we can actually connect anything we like to our AI agent as long as we know the URL for connecting to it, and as long as they allow API calls. Do they have an API? We're going to be using Tavily for this example. Now the reason I've chosen Tavily is, first of all, they have really good detailed documentation. Now, if you remember back to parts 1 and 2, I've talked about documentation a couple of times and how you should always use the documentation where you can. So Tavily has really good documentation which we can follow to make this process as streamlined as possible. The second reason is we get 1,000 free credits with Tavily, so we can sign up and start making queries without it actually costing us any money, which again is ideal for this. So you can do this, follow along, it's not going to cost you a dime. So I want you to come over to tavily.com and I want you to create an account and sign in. Once you're inside of your Tavily account, this is what you're going to see. So first of all, you're going to see that you have 1,000 credits, right? Which is excellent. We can use those 1,000 credits for free and it's not going to cost us any money. Next, you're going to see your API key. Tavily make it nice and easy. You don't need to hunt around for this for too long. It's right there. You can click it and it's going to copy it straight to the clipboard. Over on the left, we've got Overview, API Playground. What else do you need to worry about here? See this documentation. I've talked about that a few times in the previous lessons. Documentation is the key and we're going to come back to that in a minute. But what I want you to do for now is come over to API Playground. Now, what you see here on the left hand side, I want you to imagine that this here is the same as this form inside of the create a draft in Gmail, or this form for Drive. Imagine this, what you see on the left hand side, as being that form. Now if you hit additional fields, you can see there's a number of different things that we can play around with here. We can change the search depth, we can change the MAC results, lots of different options, right? So that is the form that we're seeing effectively inside of n8n. This is just obviously outside of n8n, but it's the same. Now, if I start changing things around on the left here, I'm going to say latest AI news. Now, what did you notice there? Did you notice anything changed over here? See this query? How it now says latest AI news? If I change that back to, let's say, what is the capital of the United States? See this query's changed? So this, what you see on the right hand side, is the code which corresponds to the form on the left. So this is what's going on behind the scenes when you start to mess around with these things. This is what it's actually doing underneath the hood. It's changing the code, and that code is being sent back and forth using the APIs. So that is a kind of high level overview of what's going on here. And what I would recommend is that you really come into this API playground in Tavily and mess around with it, because Tavily do a great job of allowing you to mess around with things and seeing what kind of impact that's having on the code. And you can see it all in real time, which is great. So what I want you to do now is I want you to come over to documentation. So we're going to click on that. and that's going to take us to the Tavily docs. Now, if you feel like this is intimidating, don't worry about it. Really, these documentation pages are meant for developers, right? But even if you're not a developer, we can navigate these and get the information which we need so that we can do what it is that we're trying to do. So there's lots of different things which you're going to see on here. Now, if you're ever stuck with documentation, if you really can't find what it is that you need, what I would suggest is that you go to an AI like Claude or Gemini and you either give them the URL for the page or you actually copy the contents or screenshots or something and give that information to AI and just say, look, I'm trying to connect this to a HTTP request node inside of n8n. I can't figure out how to do it, and AI will guide you through it. But what we're going to do is we are going to have a look at this. Now, you see here, we've got search the web. You've also got extract web pages, crawl. These are different types of searches we can use Tavily for. So we're going to stick with search the web. Now, you're going to see here there's Python, there's JavaScript, and there's curl. Now, I really want you to take note of this here, curl. And the reason I want you to take note of that is by using curl, we can import all of this information right into our HTTP request node in n8n, and it's going to fill out all these fields for us. So what I want you to do is, I want you to copy this curl. I want you to hit copy here in the top right. And then what I want you to do is go back to n8n, and I want you to open up this HTTP request node. Now, before we do anything, I want you to take note of the fact that none of this information has been configured. There's no headers, there's no body. The method is get, URL's empty, right? Now, you see this button here, import curl. That is what we're interested in. So what we can do is we can click on that and we can paste in all of that information which we just copied from the documentation, right? And I want you to hit import. Now all of a sudden, you're going to see that all this has changed, and you might be thinking, oh God, what's going on here? This has effectively just filled all this information out for us. So let's take a look at it from the top. So it's changed the method from get to post, and it's changed the URL. It was blank, and it's now put in the Tavily endpoint URL. So that's perfect. Authentication, it's got here as none. Now that's okay. Headers, it's turned that to on. Specify headers using fields below, and what you're going to see here is header parameters, name, authorization, which is extremely common, value, bearer, and then it's got space, and then it's got token. So we need to put our API key in here, but it says token. Now this is another good example using Tavily because this is a really common setup which you're going to see. For the headers, name, authorization, value, bearer, space, that's really key here. I don't know if you can see that in there. There's a space and then it's token. So we need to replace this token with our API key. So we're going to take that out and we're going to make sure that we leave the space in there. We're going to come back over to Tavily and we're going to go back to overview, copy your API key. We're going to come back to n8n and I want you to paste that in there. Again, if you want to see this, you can hit expression and you can hit this little square. That's going to bring it up so you can see it. You see this Tavily, then your code. That is your API key. And again, I really want to make stress that there's a space in here. Bearer, space, and then your API key. So that's the API key part filled out. Now it's got this query. Now, this is what we just went through in the playground. All of these different things here, this is just the different parameters which are being sent in our request to Tavily. So who is Leo Messi? We can change this. Again, I think I had said latest AI news. You could put in that and you can mess around with all these different options. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to show you what you would do if you couldn't figure out, or let's say you couldn't find the curl button. Let's say the documentation didn't have curl, because some documentation doesn't, right? There is cases out there where you won't find this. So I'm going to show you an example of how we would navigate that just now. I want you to come over to your AI of choice. Now for me, that's Claude. Now you can use Gemini, you can use ChatGPT. I think if you're new to the AI space, a lot of people are probably still using ChatGPT, but I would definitely suggest that you venture away from ChatGPT and start using either Claude or Gemini. Why? Well, they're better models, and for me, I like Claude because it's extremely strong when it comes to writing code. And when you're doing client work and kind of dealing with more complex logic, you will need to write code nodes. And if you don't know how to code, Claude is going to be your best friend for that. So what I want you to do is come over to Claude or whatever it is that you're using. I want you to go back to the Tavily docs and I want you to copy the URL here, okay? And I want you to paste that into Claude. And I want you to say, I am trying to configure a HTTP request node in n8n for a search with Tavily. Can you help? Oh, if I could type me configure the node correctly, please. I'm just going to say, I've also attached a screenshot so you can see what I can see. I'm going to let that run. So you can see Claude has gone to work there. It actually failed to fetch, but it has managed to grab the endpoint parameters and stuff, so it's worked okay. Sometimes that will happen with the URL, which is why I recommend also giving screenshots, because if it can't fetch the URL, then it can use the screenshots to guide you. So based on the screenshot and the API docs, here's how to configure your n8n HTTP request node for Tavily search. And you're going to see here, it's going to give you all this information. Now you can just follow this step by step, and that is going to get you set up. Some of these can be quite tricky, but just knowing the correct process to go through is key. And that is, first of all, documentation. Can you find the curl button? Number one. Number two, if you can't find the curl button, come to AI, give it the URL, give it screenshots, tell it what you're trying to do, and it will guide you to where you want to be. We're back inside of n8n. Now, anytime we add a new tool, what do we need to remember to do? We need to remember to update the system message, right? So if we open up our AI agent and we open up the system message, remember this is guiding our AI agent and everything that it's doing. So if we add a new tool, we need to tell our agent how it needs to use that tool, when it needs to use it, and if there's any guardrails and everything around that tool as well. So open up your system message. Now, just for speed, I'm just going to add this in down the bottom, although what you should be doing is adding it in the right section. So you should be going through this again or giving this to AI and saying, I've now added tool X, can you update the system message? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put down the bottom here, I'm just going to put critical instructions so that it doesn't miss it, with it not being in the right place. Anytime I ask you to search the web, I want you to use the Tavily tool, right? So that is fine. It now knows if we're asking for a web search, it needs to go to Tavily. So let's come back out of there. We're going to open this up. Now, there's going to be a problem with this here. Now, the problem is going to be that if we search this latest AI news is going to be hard coded in there. So if I were to say to my AI agent, I don't know if you guys can see this because it's probably off your screen, but I'm going to say here, search the web for the latest news on TechCrunch. Now, let's see what happens here. You see it's hitting Tavily, it's got a response, it's gone back to our agent. But there's going to be a problem here. So if we open up our chat, I searched for the latest news on TechCrunch, but the search returned information mostly about recent AI updates from Google in December 2025, not specifically TechCrunch news. So why did that happen? Well, the reason that happened was because we hard-coded this value in here. See this latest AI news in the query? That's hard-coded in there. Now, if you remember back to lesson 2, we talked about this let the model define this parameter and how that can allow AI to decide what the query is going to be. So that is why that never worked. So we're going to fix that. The issue is that sometimes when you use import from curl, it's going to dump all of that information from the documentation into your HTTP request as raw JSON. Now, that's a good time to actually talk about what is JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and think of it as like a programming language or like a data structure, right? That's all you need to know. And JSON is a common format that you're going to use. In n8n, you're always going to be really dealing with JSON, so that's all that is. And this is JSON format, which you're seeing here. So we don't need to structure the data like this, right? What we can do is, see this specify body where it says using JSON? We can change that to using fields below. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to move this over to my other screen. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to change this to using fields below. Now, what you're going to see now is this body parameters box pop up. And this is effectively the same. So what we can do is all those different fields which we just had, we can add all of those fields back in, but we can structure them like this, where we're going to have a name and a value. So the first one we had, which is the kind of most important one for us, was query, right? And value. So what do we want the value to be? Well, we want AI to decide what the value is going to be. And we touched on this in the last episode. We can use this, let the model define this parameter box as our best friend. So we're going to click on that. And now it's going to send query is going to be defined by the model. So every time we send a message to our AI agent, the AI agent is going to decide what that query is going to be, right? Now we could go back in and we could add more parameters, and we could add all of those other fields which you've seen in the raw JSON. So you could have max results, and you could have, like location, all these different things. But we're going to just leave it basic for now. So I'm going to get rid of these, and you can do that just by hitting this delete trash can at the side. So now what we're going to do is go back, and we're going to open the chat. I'm going to say, search the web for the latest AI news. Now we're going to see what happens. So it's hit our HTTP request node. Let's see what it says. Here's a summary of the latest AI news from 2024. Now, if you're watching this, you're definitely not watching it in 2024. So we're going to sort that in a second. But you can now see how it's actually pulled results using what we said to our AI agent. And it's sent that data to Tavily. So if we actually come back inside of our Tavily here, you can see up here we can change it from table, JSON, schema, which is just different formats that we can view the data in. And you can see what it said in the query here, right? See this query? That's what's been sent to Tavily. So it said latest AI news 2024. So let's talk about how we fix that date issue. I want you to come back into your AI agent, and I want you to go into your system message. And I want you to scroll down to the bottom, and I want you to say date time. Today is, and I want you to do curly bracket, and I want you to do dollar now. And you see that's gone green? You can see that on your screen there down the bottom. I'm going to show you one more time. Curly bracket, dollar now. And it should go green. And that's showing you that that is valid. So let's try that again. Let's open up our chat. And we're going to say, search the web for the latest AI news. I'm going to see what happens now. Here's the latest AI news from January 2026. Well, it is in fact January 2026, so that has sorted out the date issue. So I recommend that you jump into your system prompt and update that just now so you don't forget. That is critical, and especially if you're doing real-time web searches with your AI agent, you need to let it know what the current date and time is. Why? Well, the reason for that is this model that we're using. So we're using 4.1 mini, which is now an old model. In the AI space, that's an old model now. So the training data, which that model has been trained on, doesn't realise that it's now 2026 because the cut-off date of its training data would have been at some point in 2024. So that's how we solve that. So that is the HTTP request node in a nutshell. Now you really need to understand this because it's such a powerful node inside of n8n. It allows us to take external data and bring it into our n8n instance for it then to be processed or do whatever you want to do with it, right? So you need to understand that. Now, as a quick recap, go to your service, you want to find the documentation. Once you've got the documentation, you're going to look for curl. If you can't find curl or you're struggling with it, just copy the contents and send it to AI, put it into Claude, Gemini. You can also put in some screenshots and you can give it the URL, although sometimes the URL will not work if AI isn't able to scrape the page. So that is the process for that. Now, there's one more thing that I want to introduce to you before we close off this lesson. And that's going to be webhooks. So I want you to open up the node panel and I want you to type in webhook. Add that to your canvas. So what is a webhook? Well, a webhook, for our case, is a trigger. Now, we touched on triggers in part 1. What is a trigger? Well, a trigger is what allows our workflow to actually start. No workflow can start without one. So in our case, we've been using a chat trigger. We can have open chat, we can talk to our AI agent via the chat window. But what if we didn't want to be talking to our AI agent from inside of n8n? What if we wanted to be sending it a message in Slack or communicating it with it via Telegram? And that is what we're going to be doing in the next episode. We're going to be hooking up our AI agent to Telegram so that you can chat to it either from your phone or from your laptop in the Telegram app. So that is what webhooks allow us to do. A webhook allows us to trigger our workflow based on an external event. So something that happens outside of n8n is going to trigger our workflow. Think of it like giving your workflow a phone number that other apps can call. So you give them your phone number, when something happens, they call you and that kickstarts your workflow. So if we open up our webhook here, and what you're going to see is test URL and production URL. So I want you to click on production URL here. And this URL which you see, that is our phone number that we're going to give to the third-party app or service. And we're going to say, this is our phone number. When something happens, whatever it is that you want to be notified about, call us. And that's going to trigger our workflow when that happens. So we're going to configure this in the next episode, so don't worry about it too much for now. I just wanted to introduce the concept of webhooks to you so that you kind of have a bit of a head start on the next lesson. So that's going to box off part 3. Now we've covered some really important concepts today. We've covered the HTTP request node, we've covered webhooks, we've covered APIs, API calls, documentation, curl, a bunch, right? And these are really important things which you need to understand, because when you start building these production workflows for yourself or for clients, you need to understand this, because most of the time you're not going to be able to find what you need in the node panel here, right? So that's going to be everything for this lesson. Now, if you do want to take your AI journey a little bit further and you're serious about learning, then you can join my free Skool community. I've not long started it, so we don't have many members. And the benefit of that is that you get more tailored one-to-one support from myself. So it'd be great to have you in there, and the link will be down in the description. If not, I'll see you in part 4, which will be released tomorrow night.